Most people spend their lives trying to look confident, better posture, stronger eye contact, louder voices, clever words. But deep down, one question still controls them. What if they don't like me? That is the real cage, because confidence isn't the absence of fear. It's knowing that whatever happens next, you can handle it. You stop seeking approval. You stop proving yourself. You stop asking, do I belong here? And you start asking, what do I want to do here? That is where real confidence begins. Not when you become arrogant, but when you become independent of approval. Most people don't realize how much of their life is controlled by permission. They wait for someone to tell them they're good enough before they take themselves seriously. They wait for approval before making a decision. They wait until everyone around them agrees before taking a risk. They wait for the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity, the perfect circumstances. And sometimes they wait so long that their entire life becomes a waiting room. You can see it in the smallest things. Someone has an idea but doesn't share it because they are afraid people might think it's stupid. Someone wants to start a business but keeps researching because they're waiting to feel completely prepared. Someone wants to leave a relationship that is clearly destroying their peace, but they keep looking for permission to walk away. Someone wants to change their appearance, their career, their social circle, or their lifestyle, but they keep asking themselves what everyone else will think. The pattern is always the same. They have handed the authority over their life to other people. And the dangerous part is that nobody needs to explicitly control them. They do it automatically. They monitor reactions. They read facial expressions. They look for approval. They listen for hesitation in someone's voice. They change their behavior according to the emotional temperature of the room. Eventually, they stop asking, what do I actually want? They start asking, what will make everyone comfortable with what I want? That is not confidence. That is dependence. Real confidence begins when you understand that approval is optional. People are allowed to disagree with you. They are allowed to dislike your decisions. They are allowed to misunderstand your intentions. They are allowed to think you're making a mistake. And you are still allowed to move forward. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or reckless. It doesn't mean refusing advice. Confident people can listen. They can change their minds. They can admit when they're wrong. The difference is that they don't require someone else's permission to make a decision. They gather information, consider consequences, listen carefully, and then decide. That final decision belongs to them. Think about how much energy you waste trying to predict other people's reactions. Before you speak, you imagine how they'll respond. Before you act, you imagine what they'll say. Before you make a change, you imagine who might criticize you. You're living in conversations that haven't even happened. And because you're trying to avoid every possible negative reaction, you become trapped inside a smaller and smaller version of yourself. You don't take the opportunity because someone might judge you. You don't express the opinion because someone might disagree. You don't set the boundary because someone might become angry. You don't walk away because someone might call you selfish. Eventually, avoiding judgment becomes more important than building the life you actually want. The solution is not to stop caring about people. The solution is to stop making their reactions the final authority over your behavior. There will always be someone who thinks you're too ambitious. Someone will think you're too quiet. Someone will think you're too aggressive. Someone will think you're not doing enough. Someone will think you're doing too much. If you build your identity around satisfying everyone, you'll become a different person for every room you enter. Confidence requires a stable center. You need principles that don't change every time someone raises an eyebrow. You need standards that survive criticism. You need decisions that remain yours even when nobody applauds them. Start small. Say what you actually think. Make a decision without asking 5 people to validate it. Say no without writing an essay explaining why. Wear what you like. Pursue the opportunity you're afraid to pursue. Set the boundary you've been avoiding. And when someone doesn't approve, resist the instinct to immediately retreat. Let the discomfort exist. You will discover something important. Disapproval feels uncomfortable, but it is survivable. Once you experience that repeatedly, something inside you changes. You stop treating other people's opinions like commands. You begin realizing that approval is pleasant, but it isn't necessary. And when you no longer need permission to act, you become much more difficult to manipulate because your decisions are no longer controlled by the fear of disappointing someone else. One of the strongest forms of confidence comes from learning to tolerate rejection without allowing it to redefine you. Most people think confidence means believing that everyone will like them, accept them, respect them, or agree with them. But that is not confidence. That is dependence disguised as optimism. Real confidence begins when you understand that rejection is not an emergency, disagreement is not humiliation, and someone choosing not to accept you does not mean something is fundamentally wrong with you. Think about how often people change themselves to avoid rejection. They don't say what they really think because they are afraid of being judged. They don't approach someone because they are afraid of hearing no. They don't ask for an opportunity because they assume they will be rejected. They tolerate disrespect because they are terrified that setting a boundary might cause someone to leave. They stay silent, agreeable, and predictable because they believe being accepted is safer than being authentic. But there is a hidden cost. Every time you betray yourself to avoid rejection, you teach your mind that other people's approval is more important than your own judgment. And eventually, you become afraid of your own decisions. The way out is not to become someone who never feels rejection. You cannot control that. People will reject you. People will misunderstand you. People will lose interest. People will disagree with you. People will choose someone else. People will criticize your decisions. You cannot eliminate those experiences, but you can change what they mean. A rejection is information. It tells you that a particular person, opportunity, environment, or situation was not aligned with what you wanted. Sometimes it tells you that your approach needs improvement. Sometimes it tells you that the timing was wrong. Sometimes it tells you absolutely nothing about your worth. The mistake is turning one person's response into a permanent statement about your identity. Someone says no, and you hear, "I'm not good enough." Someone doesn't respond, and you hear, "I'm not important." Someone criticizes you, and you hear, "I'm incapable." Someone walks away, and you hear, "I'm unworthy." That interpretation is what destroys confidence. You have to separate the event from the story you create about the event. They rejected the request. They did not necessarily reject your entire existence. They disliked the idea. That doesn't mean you're unintelligent. They didn't choose you. That doesn't mean you're incapable of being chosen. Once you understand this distinction, rejection becomes less threatening. You can approach opportunities without needing a guaranteed outcome. You can start conversations without needing certainty that the other person will respond positively. You can express an opinion without requiring universal agreement. You can ask for what you want without mentally collapsing before you even hear the answer. And every time you survive rejection, your nervous system learns something valuable. You learn that discomfort has an expiration date. You learn that embarrassment doesn't kill you. You learn that disappointment doesn't destroy your identity. You learn that you can experience a painful moment and continue moving. That creates a different kind of confidence. You don't become confident because you believe everyone will say yes. You become confident because you know you can handle no. That is a massive difference. The person who desperately needs acceptance becomes easy to control. Give them approval, and they will follow you. Threaten to withdraw approval, and they will change themselves. Make them feel excluded, and they will work desperately to get back inside. But when rejection loses its power, manipulation loses one of its strongest weapons. You can walk away. You can disagree. You can say no. You can leave the conversation. You can pursue another opportunity. You can accept that not everyone belongs in your life. And you don't have to turn every rejection into revenge. That is another trap. Some people respond to rejection by becoming cold, hostile, or obsessed with proving the other person wrong. But that still means the rejection controls them. They are simply reacting in the opposite direction. Real confidence is quieter. You hear the no. You feel the disappointment. You acknowledge it. Then you continue. No dramatic performance, no desperate explanation, no attempt to force someone to change their mind, no need to prove that they made the wrong decision. You simply return your attention to your own path. The goal is not to become emotionally numb. The goal is to become emotionally resilient. You can care without becoming dependent. You can want something without needing it. You can appreciate approval without requiring it. You can experience rejection without turning it into an identity crisis. And the more you practice this, the more freedom you create inside yourself. Eventually, you stop walking into situations asking, how do I make them accept me? You start asking, is this right for me? That question changes the entire dynamic because now you are evaluating the situation instead of begging the situation to validate you. Confidence becomes powerful when it is built on evidence rather than imagination. You can tell yourself that you're capable all day long, but deep down, your mind knows the difference between an affirmation and an experience. If you constantly promise yourself that you'll change and then break those promises, your confidence weakens. If you repeatedly tell yourself that you'll take action but continue avoiding the difficult thing, your mind begins collecting evidence against you. Eventually, you stop trusting your own words. This is why real confidence is built through action. You don't need to convince yourself that you're disciplined. You need to give yourself reasons to believe it. You don't need to repeatedly tell yourself that you're brave. You need to do something that scares you and discover that you can handle the discomfort. You don't need to announce that you're becoming stronger. You need to behave like someone who can be relied upon. Every action becomes evidence. When you wake up, when you said you would, that's evidence. When you finish something you wanted to abandon, that's evidence. When you say no to something that violates your standards, that's evidence. When you have an uncomfortable conversation instead of avoiding it, that's evidence. When you make a mistake and correct it instead of hiding from it, that's evidence. Your brain begins creating a new identity from these experiences. You start thinking, I do what I say I'm going to do. That sentence is more valuable than almost any motivational statement because it creates self-trust. Most people want confidence without paying the price that creates it. They want to feel powerful before they've demonstrated reliability to themselves. They want the emotional reward without the uncomfortable repetitions that produce it. But confidence is often the result, not the starting point. You act first, you collect evidence. Then your belief changes. Imagine someone who has spent years avoiding difficult conversations. Every time conflict appears, they disappear, become passive, or say whatever will keep the situation peaceful. They may tell themselves they're calm, but underneath that calmness is often fear. Now imagine that same person begins practicing small acts of courage. They express a disagreement respectfully. They establish a boundary. They say no without apologizing excessively. They address a problem instead of pretending it doesn't exist. At first, it feels uncomfortable. But afterward, something happens. They realize they survived. Then they do it again and again. Eventually, the thing that once felt terrifying becomes normal. That is how confidence is constructed. You don't build it by waiting until you feel ready. You build it by repeatedly showing yourself that you can function while you're uncomfortable. This also explains why keeping small promises matters so much. If you tell yourself you'll exercise and repeatedly don't, you're teaching your mind that your intentions don't mean much. If you tell yourself you'll work for an hour and immediately give in to distraction, you're reinforcing the belief that your impulses are stronger than your decisions. But when you begin keeping small promises, something shifts. You wake up when you said you would. You complete the task. You put the phone away. You finish the workout, you read the pages, you make the difficult call. None of these actions seem extraordinary by themselves, but together they create an identity. You begin developing a relationship with yourself based on reliability. And once you trust yourself, external uncertainty becomes less frightening. You don't know whether the interview will go well, but you trust yourself to prepare. You don't know whether the relationship will work, but you trust yourself to communicate honestly. You don't know whether the business will succeed, but you trust yourself to learn and adapt. You don't know whether someone will accept you, but you trust yourself to handle rejection. That's a much stronger foundation than believing everything will go according to plan. Confidence isn't the belief that nothing can go wrong. It's the belief that you won't abandon yourself when something does. This is why difficult experiences can become confidence-building experiences when you respond to them correctly. Failure can become evidence that you can recover. Criticism can become evidence that you can remain composed. Rejection can become evidence that you can continue. Pressure can become evidence that you can think clearly when circumstances become uncomfortable. Every challenge becomes another opportunity to prove something to yourself. And eventually, you stop needing to constantly ask whether you're confident. Your behavior answers the question for you. One of the clearest signs of confidence is the ability to control your reactions. Most people believe power comes from responding quickly, speaking loudly, defending yourself immediately, or making sure everyone knows when they've crossed a line. But emotional strength often looks completely different. It looks like a pause. It looks like silence. It looks like someone who hears something provocative and refuses to let another person's words decide what happens next. Think about how easy it is to control someone who reacts automatically. Say something insulting, and they become angry. Ignore them, and they become desperate for attention. Challenge their status, and they start proving themselves. Question their ability, and they become defensive. Threaten to leave, and they start begging. Push the right emotional button, and their behavior becomes predictable. That predictability is weakness. If someone knows exactly how to make you angry, they have access to your behavior. They don't need to control your body. They only need to control your emotional state. Confidence changes this because confident people create distance between what happens and what they do about it. Something happens. They notice it. They pause, then they choose. That tiny space is where self-control lies. Someone insults you. Instead of instantly defending yourself, you take a breath. Someone challenges your opinion. Instead of rushing to prove you're right, you listen. Someone sends an aggressive message. Instead of responding while emotionally charged, you wait. Someone tries to pressure you into a decision. Instead of answering immediately, you say, "I'll think about it." These responses may look simple, but psychologically they are powerful because you are refusing to surrender control of your behavior to someone else's stimulus. This doesn't mean becoming passive. Control is not weakness. You can still be direct. You can still establish boundaries. You can still confront disrespect. The difference is that your response comes from a decision instead of an emotional explosion. There is a massive difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is automatic. Response is chosen. Reaction says, "You made me do this." Response says, "I decided this is how I'm going to handle it." The second mindset creates responsibility and power at the same time. You also need to understand that not every situation deserves your energy. Insecure people often feel obligated to respond to everything. Every criticism requires an explanation. Every misunderstanding requires correction. Every insult requires retaliation. Every disagreement becomes a battle. Confident people become selective. They ask themselves, does this actually matter? If the answer is no, they let it pass. If the answer is yes, they address it without unnecessary emotion. This is especially important when someone is deliberately trying to provoke you. Some people test boundaries by creating emotional reactions. They make sarcastic comments. They interrupt you. They question your decisions. They attempt to embarrass you in front of others. If you immediately lose control, you've given them exactly what they wanted. But when you remain composed, the dynamic changes. You don't have to win the exchange. You don't have to destroy them with the perfect comeback. You don't have to prove that you're unaffected. You simply refuse to become predictable. And that is one of the most important principles of psychological strength. Don't let someone else write your emotional script. Your confidence should not depend on maintaining a perfect emotional state. You will still get angry. You will still feel embarrassed. You will still experience disappointment. The goal isn't to eliminate emotion. The goal is to prevent emotion from becoming the driver, feel the anger without immediately acting on it, feel the fear without allowing it to make the decision, feel the embarrassment without running away. Feel the disappointment without turning it into bitterness. You can experience an emotion without obeying it. That distinction separates emotional maturity from emotional impulsiveness. The next time someone pushes one of your buttons, notice what happens inside you before you do anything. Your body may tense. Your heart may speed up. Your thoughts may become aggressive. You may suddenly feel the urge to explain, attack, withdraw, or prove yourself. Don't rush. Give yourself a moment. That moment is not weakness. That moment is control. And the more often you practice it, the less power other people have over your behavior, because they can still influence your emotions, but they no longer get to automatically decide what you do with them. One of the most exhausting habits you can develop is the need to be understood by everyone. You explain your intentions, you clarify your words, you defend your decisions, you replay conversations in your head, wondering whether someone interpreted you correctly, and when you realize they didn't, you feel an almost irresistible urge to fix their perception of you. But confidence begins when you understand something uncomfortable. You cannot control the story other people create about you. People don't experience you directly. They experience their interpretation of you. They filter your words through their own history, insecurities, expectations, beliefs, and experiences. Two people can watch you do the exact same thing and create completely different explanations for why you did it. One person sees confidence. Another sees arrogance. One sees independence. Another sees selfishness. One sees calmness. Another sees weakness. One sees boundaries. Another sees rejection. You could spend your entire life trying to eliminate these misunderstandings, and you would still fail. This is why constantly explaining yourself can become a trap. At first, explanation seems reasonable. Someone misunderstands you, so you clarify. But then clarification becomes defense. Defense becomes over-explanation. And eventually you're no longer communicating because you want to be understood. You're communicating because you desperately need the other person to approve of your explanation. That's a very different thing. Confident people know when clarification is useful and when it is unnecessary. If you made a genuine mistake, explain it. If your actions hurt someone you care about, communicate. If an important misunderstanding could damage a relationship, address it. But when someone has already decided what they want to believe about you, endless explanation rarely changes anything. Sometimes the strongest response is to let them think what they think. This is difficult because the human mind wants closure. We want our intentions recognized. We want people to know that we weren't trying to hurt them. We want them to understand why we made the decision we made. We want our character to be accurately represented, but life doesn't guarantee that. There will be people who misunderstand you even after you've explained yourself clearly. There will be people who judge you without knowing the full story. There will be people who create narratives about you based on incomplete information. And if your peace depends on correcting every narrative, you will never have peace. Think about how much energy disappears when you stop trying to manage everyone's perception. You don't have to respond to every accusation. You don't have to defend every decision. You don't have to prove that you're a good person to someone committed to seeing you negatively. You don't have to convince someone that they were wrong about you. Your behavior over time speaks louder than one conversation ever could. This doesn't mean becoming careless about how you affect people. Confidence is not an excuse to ignore accountability. If you've done something wrong, own it. If you hurt someone, listen. If you made a mistake, correct it. But there is a difference between accountability and self-defense. Accountability says, I made a mistake and I'll fix it. Insecurity says, I made a mistake, but let me explain why I'm actually not a bad person. The first creates growth. The second creates exhaustion. You also need to become comfortable with silence. Sometimes you don't need the final word. Sometimes you don't need to respond to the message. Sometimes you don't need to correct the rumor. Sometimes you don't need to prove that someone misunderstood your intentions. Silence can feel uncomfortable when you're used to defending yourself, but discomfort isn't a command. Let the misunderstanding exist. Let the opinion exist. Let someone walk away believing whatever they choose to believe. Your identity doesn't become less real because someone interpreted it incorrectly. In fact, one of the strongest signs that you're becoming confident is that you can tolerate being misunderstood without immediately abandoning yourself. You stop changing your personality to match every person's expectations. You stop explaining your boundaries until the other person approves of them. You stop turning every disagreement into a courtroom where you must prove your innocence. You begin realizing that not everyone deserves access to your deepest explanations. Some people are curious. Some people are genuinely trying to understand. Others are simply looking for ammunition. Confidence means learning the difference. And once you stop needing everyone to understand you, you gain something much more valuable. The freedom to live according to your values without constantly checking whether everyone else approves of the way you live them. The highest form of confidence isn't believing that everything will go your way. It's knowing that when things don't go your way, you won't fall apart. Most people feel confident when circumstances are comfortable. They feel strong when people approve of them, when their plans are working, when they are winning, and when nothing unexpected is happening. But that kind of confidence is fragile because it depends on the environment cooperating with you. Real confidence appears under pressure. It appears when the plan fails, when someone rejects you, when an opportunity disappears, when you make a mistake, when someone criticizes you, when you don't know what happens next. In those moments, the question isn't, can I guarantee the outcome? You can't. The better question is, can I trust myself to respond? That question changes everything. You don't need certainty about the future when you have confidence in your ability to navigate uncertainty. You don't need to know exactly how a difficult situation will end. You need to know that you won't abandon your judgment simply because you're afraid. Think about what happens when people don't trust themselves. They constantly look outside for direction. They ask everyone what they should do. They change their decisions based on whoever spoke to them last. They panic when circumstances change. They assume one mistake means everything is ruined. Their confidence rises and falls with the situation. But someone who trusts themselves operates differently. They can receive advice without becoming dependent on it. They can make mistakes without destroying their identity. They can change direction without feeling like a failure. They can admit they don't know something without feeling inferior. They can enter uncertainty without demanding immediate answers. Their internal message is simple. I may not know exactly what happens next, but I'll figure out the next step. That is a powerful belief because life rarely gives you the complete map. You usually get one step at a time. You make the decision, then you learn, then you adjust, then you move again. Confidence comes from trusting that process. This is why you should stop demanding that yourself always be certain. Certainty and confidence are not the same thing. Certainty says, I know exactly what will happen. Confidence says, whatever happens, I can respond. The second is far more realistic. Imagine losing an opportunity you've spent months preparing for. An insecure mind immediately turns the event into a disaster. It's over. I failed. I'm behind. Everyone else is moving forward. A confident mind can feel disappointment without turning it into a prophecy. That didn't work. What can I learn? What is still available? What do I do next? Same event, different interpretation, different behavior, different future. This is why pressure can actually strengthen confidence when you respond correctly. Every difficult situation gives you an opportunity to demonstrate reliability to yourself. You lose something and recover. You make a mistake and correct it. You get rejected and continue. You experience criticism and remain grounded. You face uncertainty and make a decision anyway. Each experience becomes evidence that you can survive situations you once believed you couldn't handle. Eventually, your confidence stops depending on predicting the future. You begin trusting your ability to adapt, and adaptability is one of the strongest forms of psychological strength because life is constantly changing. People change, opportunities change, plans change, relationships change, circumstances change. If your confidence requires stability, you will always be vulnerable. But if your confidence comes from knowing you can adapt, instability becomes less frightening. You don't need to control everything. You need to control what belongs to you. Your decisions, your effort, your attention, your standards, your response. Your willingness to continue, that is where your power exists. When pressure appears, don't immediately ask, how do I make this situation disappear? Ask, who do I need to be while I'm inside it? Maybe you need patience. Maybe you need courage. Maybe you need discipline. Maybe you need to walk away. Maybe you need to admit you were wrong. Maybe you need to begin again. Whatever the answer is, trust yourself enough to take the next step, because confidence isn't the absence of uncertainty. It is the refusal to let uncertainty convince you that you're incapable. You will have moments when you doubt yourself. You will have moments when you feel afraid. You will have moments when you don't know what to do. That's normal. The goal isn't to eliminate those moments. The goal is to stop interpreting them as proof that you're weak. You can be uncertain and still act. You can be afraid and still move. You can fail and still recover. You can lose and still rebuild. You can be misunderstood and still remain yourself. And when you repeatedly prove that to yourself, something changes at the deepest level. You stop needing life to guarantee your safety before you take action. You stop waiting for perfect circumstances. You stop asking whether you are capable enough. You begin moving with the quiet certainty that whatever comes next, you will meet it, learn from it, adapt to it, and keep moving forward. That is the kind of confidence nobody can give you, and nobody can easily take away, because it isn't built on praise, status, money, or approval. It is built on the relationship you have with yourself. And when you can trust yourself under pressure, you no longer need the world to become less frightening before you become stronger.